Okay, so have you ever like looked at a family tree and thought, wow, this is a mess?
It can be pretty amazing to think about all those connections.
Yeah, it's like way more complicated than people realize, and that's just like one family.
Right?
Imagine trying to like untangle the branches of an entire species family tree.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole other level.
That's what we're diving into today, like how scientists use this thing called the Colijn Plazzotta rank or CP rank.
EP rank.
Yeah, to understand the shape of evolution.
I see. So it's like we're giving each evolutionary tree its own personality score based on how its branches are arranged.
Okay, I like that, a personality score.
Yeah, some trees are more like those tall, skinny cypress trees.
Yeah.
You know, the ones that seem to just shoot straight up.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
While others are more spread out like a giant oak with branches going everywhere.
Okay, so that makes sense visually, but how do you actually measure the, like, quote-unquote personality of a tree that charts millions of years of evolution?
That's where the CP rank comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
So it's basically a number assigned to each tree, and the higher the number, the more unbalanced the tree is.
Unbalanced.
Exactly. So imagine a tree where each new branch sprouts directly off the main trunk, like a long line of beads.
Huh, interesting.
That's what's called a caterpillar tree.
A caterpillar tree.
Yeah, because it looks kind of like a caterpillar.
Okay, I could see that.
And it gets a high CP rank because it's so stretched out.
Gotcha. So a caterpillar tree is like the extreme unbalanced poster child for evolutionary trees.
You could say that.
But here's what I find really interesting about this paper you sent over.
Yeah.
It connects the CP rank to the actual height of the tree.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, and that seems like kind of a big deal, right?
It is a big deal. It's like discovering that your arm span is always perfectly proportional to your height.
Okay. I can visualize that.
It makes you wonder what other hidden connections are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
And in evolutionary trees, that height connection unlocks a bunch of insights. For example, by studying how this CP rank changes with the height of the tree, we can actually start to get clues about the pace of evolution.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like were there periods of rapid branching where new species were popping up left and right? Or did things unfold more gradually?
That's incredible. And this is where I always wish I paid more attention in biology class.
It's never too late to learn.
That's true. So walk me through this a little bit.
Sure.
How do scientists actually study the CP rank of a tree? Do they just like analyze tons of real evolutionary trees and see what patterns emerge?
They do analyze real trees, but to really get a good handle on the bigger picture, they also use computer models to generate thousands of theoretical trees.
Theoretical trees. So like they're simulating evolution in a computer.
Yeah, it's like running simulations to see how evolution could have played out under different circumstances.
So it's kind of like a scientist's version of choose your own adventure for evolution.
Exactly. You got it.
I like that.
They use different models, each with its own set of branching rules, to create these virtual evolutionary trees.
Okay, let's talk about some of those models because they sound really important.
Sure.
The first one I saw mentioned in the paper was something called uniformly random, unlabeled, unordered binary trees.
Right.
And seriously, who comes up with these names?
I know they can be a mouthful.
It's like a whole sentence.
But the names usually describe exactly what the model does.
Okay, that's fair.
In this case, you're basically talking about the most random way to build a tree.
The most random way.
Yeah, imagine shaking a container of unlabeled branches and letting them fall however they may.
Oh, God.
That's essentially what this model simulates. It's like the baseline for comparison.
That's actually a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
So everything's up in the air, branches going every which way.
Exactly. Chaos.
So what's the next model like? Okay, so we've got our shake it up random tree model. What's the next one?
So the next one is a bit more organized. It's called uniformly random leaf-labeled binary trees, or cladograms for short.
Cladograms, that sounds very official.
It is. Think of them like family trees, but with name tags for each member.
Okay, like that.
Each leaf on the tree represents a specific species, and the branches show how they're related.
So if the first model is like scattering branches in the wind, this one is more like carefully piecing together a puzzle.
You got it. And this time it's not just about pure randomness, it's about mapping out the connections between known relatives.
Makes sense. What about the third model, Yule-Harding trees?
Ah, those are like watching a tree grow in. Fast forward. Imagine a tiny sapling slowly adding branches with new growth sprouting from existing limbs.
So it's a more step-by-step process.
Exactly. It's a more realistic way to model how species evolve over time, at least in a simplified way.
Okay, so we've got randomness, we've got family ties, and we've got gradual growth. What's the point of having all these different models?
That's a great question. By comparing how the CP rank behaves across these different models, we can start to see if real evolutionary trees lean towards imbalance or something in between.
So it's like having multiple lenses to examine the same phenomenon, each revealing a different aspect.
Precisely. And by using these models, we can test if the connection we see between CP rank and tree height holds true across different evolutionary scenarios.
So it adds another layer of validation to the findings.
Exactly.
But we keep coming back to these caterpillar trees and how they can skew things. What does it actually mean for evolution if these unbalanced trees are so influential?
That is the million-dollar question. It suggests that evolution might not always be this slow, gradual process of branching.
You're saying there might be periods where new species emerge in rapid bursts, creating these unbalanced caterpillar-like structures.
Exactly. Like imagine a sudden burst of new species all branching off from a single ancestor.
So those periods of rapid diversification can have a lasting impact on the shape of the evolutionary tree, which is reflected in the CP rank.
Exactly. It's like a snapshot of a particularly chaotic time in evolutionary history.
This is really making me rethink how I picture evolution.
Yeah.
It's not just a straight line or a perfectly symmetrical tree. It's more like a wild, unpredictable journey with twists and turns along the way.
And the CP rank is helping us to map out those twists and turns.
So by studying CP rank, and especially its relationship to tree height, we're essentially looking for clues about the speed bumps and detours on the road of evolution.
Precisely. We're trying to reconstruct the history of life on Earth, not just who is related to whom, but also how quickly those relationships changed over time.
And that's where those log-to-log calculations come in, right? It's not just about looking at the raw numbers, but finding the right lens to make sense of them.
You got it. It's like we need a special kind of measuring stick to compare the CP ranks of trees with different numbers of leaves.
Otherwise, we're just comparing apples to oranges.
Exactly. We need a common scale to see the underlying patterns, and that's what log-to-log helps us do.
This is fascinating. So if these caterpillar periods are real, what triggers them? Is it a sudden change in the environment, a new adaptation that opens up a world of possibilities, or just pure chance?
Now that is the question, isn't it?
Okay, let's get into those numbers then.
Right.
What did the scientists find when they actually crunched all the data on these CP ranks and tree models?
Well, remember those 3 tree models we talked about?
Yeah, the random ones, the family reunion ones, and the slow growth ones.
Exactly. Well, it turns out the CP rank doesn't behave the same way in each one.
Oh, really? So, the personality scores of our trees depend on the rules of the game, so to speak.
Exactly. For example, with the completely random trees, the ones we imagined shaking out of a container,
Yeah.
the average CP rank grows at a particular rate.
Yeah.
Basically, the more leaves you add to the tree, the more likely it is to become unbalanced.
Okay, so more leaves, more chaos, higher CP rank. Makes sense.
Right.
What about cladograms, the family reunion trees?
Actually, a similar thing happens there too. The average CP rank still increases as the tree grows.
Okay.
But there's a subtle difference in the math compared to the random trees.
Interesting. So even though the overall trend is kind of the same, the details tell us that these trees are following slightly different rules behind the scenes.
Exactly, like those tiny genetic variations that can make one species more successful than another.
Huh, I see what you mean. Okay, so what about the Yule-Harding trees? The ones that grow branch by branch.
Those are the interesting ones. Their average CP rank increased much more slowly than the other 2 types of trees.
Really? So it's like they're naturally inclined to be more balanced.
It seems that way, although they can still have those occasional caterpillar moments.
So does this mean that maybe those wild periods of rapid diversification aren't actually the norm in evolution?
It's possible, and that's what's so cool about this research. It doesn't give us all the answers, but it gives us new ways to think about the questions.
This has been a really cool deep dive. We've gone from what is a CP rank to maybe evolution isn't what we thought it was.
That's science for you. Every answer leads to more questions. The paper we talked about today is just one small piece of a huge puzzle. But by understanding this CP rank and how it connects to tree height and how it plays out with different evolutionary models, we're getting a whole new perspective on the history of life on Earth.
It's like we've been given this brand new map, and now we can start exploring all these unknown areas of evolutionary biology.
Exactly.
So for anyone listening who's like me and is suddenly super into the secret lives of evolutionary trees, what should they check out next?
Honestly, the best place to start is the paper itself. The title might sound a bit scary, but it's well worth a read.
And hey, you never know, maybe someone listening to this will be the one to finally crack the code of evolution.
I hope so.
This was great. Thanks for joining me.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, ready to dive in. Today, we're going to be exploring something pretty cool, and it's all about, well, it's kind of like family trees, but instead of like, your great Aunt Carol, we're talking about unlabeled binary-rooted trees. Yeah, no, the name sounds a little technical maybe, but stick with me here. Just picture those family tree diagrams, right? But instead of names, it's all about the way the lines connect, the structure of the whole thing. And that's where things get really interesting, because it turns out these structures, they pop up everywhere. And to help us break it all down, we've got this fascinating research paper all about something called the Colijn Plazzotta ranking system. Basically, they figured out a way to give each of these tree structures, these shapes, its own unique number, like a special ID. And the really cool thing, this isn't just some math puzzle, okay? This stuff actually has some really interesting implications, like in evolutionary biology.
Wow.
Seriously. So get ready, because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride through the world of tree structures, secret codes, and maybe even a little bit of evolution thrown in for good measure. I'm excited to see where this takes us. All right, so this research paper, it digs into this link between a tree's Colijn Plazzotta rank, remember it's like its ID number, and its height. And when we're talking height here, think of it like this. Imagine you're dropping like a marble or something from the very tippy top of the tree, and you watch it bounce all the way down to the bottom right. The number of levels that marble goes through, that's the tree's height.
And what's wild is this research found that the height of a tree and its CP rank, they're like really closely connected.
Yeah, it's like this hidden pattern within the pattern. And speaking of patterns, this is where it gets really cool, because the research, it starts looking at these specific types of trees. They're called caterpillar trees. And
Caterpillar trees, they're really interesting because they're long and thin. Almost every branch on a caterpillar tree, it just leads straight to a leaf. So they're kind of like the supermodel of the tree world.
No bushy branches on these guys?
Nope. And what the researchers found is that these caterpillar trees, they consistently have the highest CP rank, like out of any other tree structure with the same number of leaves.
So like in this world of mathematical trees, being tall and skinny, that's like the winning look. And this is big because it gives us like a starting point for figuring out how this whole ranking system works. Now, there are other types of trees too, like these things called pseudo-caterpillar trees. And they're almost like caterpillars, but
they're a little more complex. Yeah, like a caterpillar tree with a couple extra branches,
Okay, so a little less supermodel, a little more
like rugged.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Rugged. But even with those extra branches, the caterpillar structure, it's still like the king, at least when it comes to this ranking.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild when you think about it, right? Like these caterpillar trees, they've kind of revealed something fundamental about how this whole system ticks. But it gets even more interesting because this connection between rank and height, it's not just limited to caterpillars and pseudo-caterpillars. It actually pops up in all these unexpected places when you start generating random trees.
Yeah, the researchers looked at 3 different ways to make these random trees. Uniformly random unlabeled trees, uniformly random leaf-labeled trees, and Yule-Harding trees.
I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, but
basically, imagine you've got a bunch of dots, right? And each dot represents a leaf on a tree. You could connect those dots up in tons of different ways to make different tree shapes. And these models, they're like different sets of rules for how to connect them randomly.
like a random tree generator. So what happened?
Well, the crazy thing is, across all 3 of these models, it didn't matter how they generated the random trees, the average CP rank was still super influenced by, you guessed it, those caterpillar trees.
Those caterpillars are back at it again.
Yeah.
But why? Why are they so influential, even in these random trees?
Well, think about it. We already know that caterpillar trees, they consistently get the highest rankings, right? And as you add more leaves to a tree, those caterpillar rankings, they skyrocket, like way faster than any other tree structure. So even when you're looking at a whole bunch of random trees, those super high caterpillar rankings, they still have this huge pull on the average.
Okay, so we've gone deep on these mathematical trees, talking about heights and ranks and these like celebrity caterpillar structures. But before we get too lost in the theoretical forest here, I want to bring it back to why this matters in the real world. Because believe it or not, this isn't just some abstract math problem. Remember those evolutionary trees we mentioned earlier? Those trees that show how different species, they're all connected, going way back.
Right, like a family tree, but for like all of life on Earth.
Exactly. And what's amazing is this Colijn Plazzotta thing, this ranking system, it might actually be useful for understanding those evolutionary trees even better.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Imagine you've got 2 groups of animals, right? And we've got their evolutionary trees all mapped out. Now, let's say one group, their tree, it consistently has a really high CP rank, while the other group, their rank is lower. That difference, it could tell us something really interesting about how those groups evolved.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of stories could these ranks tell?
Well, a really high CP rank, especially if it involves a lot of those, remember those caterpillar trees?
Oh yeah, the tall, skinny ones.
Exactly. So a high CP rank with lots of those caterpillars, it could mean that that group of animals, they went through a period of super fast diversification, like bam, a ton of new species all branching out really quickly.
So it's like a high CP rank could be a sign of some serious evolutionary fireworks.
Exactly. And on the flip side, a lower CP rank might mean that group evolved a bit slower, more gradually over time.
Wow, this is blowing my mind. It's like these mathematical trees, they're not just some abstract concept. They're like a secret code for understanding the entire history of life on Earth. This deep dive has been quite the adventure, hasn't it? We've climbed up caterpillar trees, cracked the code of the Colijn Plazzotta ranking system, and even glimpsed the evolution of life itself, all through the lens of math. But you know what? It makes you wonder, what other secrets are hidden within these mathematical trees? What other connections are we just starting to uncover? It's like we've only just scratched the surface of this amazing world. And if this deep dive has you pondering those questions too, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your questions, your aha moments, everything. We love to hear from fellow tree explorers, so keep those questions coming. And until next time, happy exploring, everyone. Ever notice how, like, family trees in nature, they often have these kind of similar shapes? Turns out there's this hidden mathematical code that's influencing how those trees branch out. And well, today we are cracking that code by diving deep into the world of what we call unlabeled binary trees.
And what's really cool is this code, it's like a special ranking system, actually tells us how likely we are to find a tree with a specific shape just by pure chance. So we're talking about something called the Colijn Plazzotta rank.
Colijn Plazzotta rank.
Yeah, CP rank for short.
Catchy.
Right. So the higher a tree's CP rank, the less likely you are to just stumble upon it growing out in the wild, so to speak.
Okay, so we're not talking about like oak trees or, palm trees here, right?
Right.
What exactly do we mean when we say unlabeled binary trees?
Think of it like a family tree, but we've stripped it down to the bare essentials.
Okay.
We're interested in how those individuals, those members, are connected to each other, not their specific names or anything like that.
Okay.
So each point on our tree, we call that a node, and each node can have at most 2 children.
Oh.
And those represent like the branching points, as we go down the lineage.
Okay, so we've got the basic shape down.
Yeah.
But how do we actually rank these abstract trees? It's not as simple as just like lining up students tallest to shortest, is it?
Not quite, no. CP rank, it gets a little more complex. It relies on this really clever recursive system.
Okay.
So imagine you're starting with a single leaf.
Okay.
The simplest tree possible, right?
Right.
That gets a rank of 1. Now, as we start to build more complex trees, the rank of a parent node that's determined by the ranks of its 2 children, it's subtrees.
So to figure out the rank of the bigger tree, you need to know the ranks of all the smaller parts. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, it is. And there's a catch. CP rank, it plays favorites.
Oh.
It loves balanced trees. The more symmetrical those branches, the lower its CP rank will be. But here's the real kicker. This love of balance, it ties directly into a tree's height.
Hold on, height, like how tall it would be if you drew it out on a piece of paper.
Exactly. The longest path you can find from the root of that tree all the way down to one of its leaves, that's its height. And what's incredible is that the taller a tree is, the higher its CP rank tends to be. They go hand in hand.
So there's this like hidden link between the tree's shape, its CP rank, and how likely it is to, occur naturally. That's wild. But before we get ahead of ourselves, can you walk me through how this CP rank is actually calculated? You mentioned something about recursion.
Absolutely. Let's say we've got a small tree. It's got 3 leaves, right?
Right.
To calculate its CP rank, we've first got to look at the ranks of its left and right subtrees. Now, we always arrange it so the left subtree has a higher rank than the right.
Okay.
Then there's a formula, which we can totally delve into later, but this formula basically uses those subtree ranks to like spit out the overall CP rank for the entire tree.
So it's like each parent tree inherits this ranking based on like the rankings of its children trees. But you mentioned that CP rank favors balance. What happens if things get a little, wonky?
That's where our stars of the show come in, the caterpillars and pseudo-caterpillars.
Now, those sound like trees I can get behind. Do they have fuzzy leaves? Do they crawl around too?
I'm afraid not, no.
Okay.
They're just names for very specific tree shapes. So imagine the most lopsided, imbalanced tree you can. Almost like a single branch with a few leaves just sparsely hanging off.
Okay.
That's our caterpillar.
Okay.
And because of that structure, it always earns the highest possible CP rank for that given number of leaves. Now, pseudo-caterpillars, on the other hand, they're like caterpillars that are trying to be a bit more respectable.
Okay.
They have that long central branch, but there's a touch more symmetry in how their leaves are arranged.
So caterpillars are the, rebellious teenagers of the tree world with their off-the-charts CP ranks.
Yeah.
And the pseudocaterpillars are trying to, conform a bit more.
A perfect analogy. And remember how I said height and CP rank are connected?
Yes.
Well, our wonky caterpillar, with its long branch, that means it's destined for a high CP rank. And it's not just because of the imbalance, but because of its impressive height.
So the more stretched out, the more top-heavy a tree is, the higher the CP rank is going to be.
Exactly.
It all comes down to this fascinating interplay between the shape, the height, and that ranking. But how does this ranking system actually play out when we start introducing the element of randomness?
Ah, that's where things get really interesting.
So it's like we're not just looking at trees that already exist, we're creating a forest from scratch. Yeah. But instead of planting actual seeds, we're using these algorithms to determine, how the trees grow. How does that work exactly?
Okay, so imagine this. You're flipping a coin.
Okay.
Heads. A new branch goes to the left.
Okay.
Tails. It goes to the right. And you just keep doing this over and over again.
Okay.
That simple act of chance, it creates these things called random cattle entries.
Random cattle entries.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, really.
Yeah.
How this super basic rule can create all this diversity and complexity.
So pure randomness is basically dictating how these trees are going to look.
Yeah.
But are there other ways to generate these random forests?
Oh, absolutely. There's random otter trees. Those follow a slightly more well, let's just say they have a more intricate set of rules.
Okay.
And then there are random binary search trees.
Right.
These are kind of the workhorses in computer science. They have this unique way of organizing themselves as new data gets added.
So each method for creating these random forests, it leads to a different variety of tree shapes in the end.
Yeah.
Does this impact our CP rank in any way?
You're right on the money. Here's where that link between CP rank and how likely a tree is to just appear, it comes into play.
Okay.
Remember we said the higher the CP rank, the less likely you are to find that tree randomly?
Yes.
Well, in each of these random forests, the trees that pop up the most, they tend to have lower average CP ranks.
Wait, so the way we even make these random trees affects the CP ranks we see the most?
It does.
Okay, can you give an example?
Okay, so let's take the uniform model. In this model, every single possible tree with a certain number of leaves, it's got an equal chance of showing up.
Okay.
Think of it as the fairest forest of them all.
Okay.
Now, here's what's cool. Mathematicians have figured out that in this model, the average height of a tree, so that longest path from the root to a leaf, it grows kind of like the square root of the number of leaves.
So more leaves generally means a taller tree, but not in a straightforward way.
Precisely. It's that square root relationship that throws a wrench in things.
Okay.
And because we know that height and CP rank are so tight, this tells us something really important about how those CP ranks are spread out, distributed in this uniform model.
So are you saying that, by understanding this square root connection between the height and how many leaves there are, we can begin to predict what CP ranks we're most likely to see?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like having the secret decoder ring for, understanding the language of trees.
Okay.
And this principle, it stays true even as we move to other types of random forests, like those made with the Colijn method or the otter method.
Okay.
Each one might have its own quirks, its own way of messing with the average heights of the trees, but that link, that connection between height and CP rank, that always stays the same.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
Yeah.
This ranking system, we started with something kind of abstract, right? Just based on how branches are structured. But now it's revealing these hidden patterns in how likely a tree is to just pop up. And that depends on how we even choose to grow this theoretical forest.
And there's even more to it, because within this whole height, CP rank, randomness thing, there's a captivating story about two pretty strange characters. Caterpillars and their, slightly more respectable cousins. Pseudo-caterpillars.
Right, so we're back to our wonky caterpillars.
Yeah.
What is it about them that makes them so interesting when we're talking about these random forests?
Well, it all comes back to that that relationship between CP rank and tree height.
Okay.
In a lot of these random forests, especially the ones that are made with those simpler rules, like the uniform model caterpillars, they tend to stick out.
Stick out how?
Yeah.
Like they're too cool for school with their high CP ranks.
Yeah, you could say that. It's their structure, long and branchy. It gives them a high CP rank. And it also makes them less likely to show up in these more, I guess, balanced random forests. Think of it like trying to find a palm tree in the middle of a pine forest.
Okay.
It's not impossible, but it's statistically unlikely.
So even though there's all this randomness baked in, certain shapes, like our caterpillar friends, they're just less likely to show up, almost like the algorithms have a little bias against them or something.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because of how they're structured and the fact that their CP rank, it skyrockets as you add more leaves, caterpillars actually have a huge influence on the average CP rank of the entire forest.
Hold on, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. How can these rare trees with these high CP ranks, how can they have such a big impact on the average?
Okay. Think of it like this. Imagine you're calculating the average height of everybody in a room.
Okay.
Now you add one person who's like 8 feet tall.
Okay.
Even if everyone else's average height, suddenly the average for the whole room jumps up.
Right. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So even though caterpillars might be rare in some of these random forests, those extreme CP ranks, they're like the 8-foot-tall person.
Yeah.
They have a big effect on the average CP rank of all the trees.
Exactly. It's a great example of how these outliers, even the ones that are way out there on the edges of what's likely, they can still have this surprising influence on the big picture. And mathematicians, they've actually come up with formulas to show this, to capture this effect. And it's especially noticeable in that uniform model we were talking about earlier.
So we're not just using the CP rank to understand like one tree at a time.
Right.
It's giving us clues about the whole forest, how likely it is to find those wonky caterpillars in there. It's amazing. But what does this all mean for us in the real world? I mean, we've gone from abstract trees to random forests to caterpillars messing with averages. How does any of this connect to, our lives?
That's the beauty of these deep dives, is like they open up all these possibilities. So let's say you're really into evolutionary biology. Understanding these principles, it might give you insights into why certain family trees are more common than others in nature.
Okay, yeah.
It can even help us see if our models of evolution are accurate by comparing, the CP rank distributions they predict with what we actually observe.
So it's like having this whole new way of looking at evolution.
Exactly.
Of understanding what shapes the diversity of life on Earth. That's incredible. What about for people who are, a little more digitally inclined?
Well, for computer scientists, this is all about efficiency.
Okay.
Binary trees, they're crucial for storing and retrieving data quickly.
Okay.
And knowing how those structures are likely to change, to evolve under different conditions, it's key. It helps us make those searches faster and just make data storage better overall.
It's like we've uncovered this secret code that's controlling these trees, both in the natural world and in the digital world, too. We've seen how this code, the CP rank, it's tied to the tree's shape, its height, even how likely it is to pop up randomly. But the craziest part, we're still just at the beginning.
Yeah. We've only really scratched the surface here.
Right.
We've explored the average behavior of these CP ranks in different situations, but the exact calculations, the nitty-gritty of how those probabilities actually play out, specific numbers of leaves and specific tree shapes, well, that's a challenge for another deep dive.
So there's still so much more to explore, more to uncover in this world of unlabeled binary trees. Who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will be the one to finally crack the code and reveal even deeper connections between math, nature, and the digital world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time. Ever try to, organize every possible family tree? Not by names or anything, but just by how those branches connect. That's kind of what we're diving into today with these things called unlabeled binary-rooted trees.
Okay.
We've got excerpts from a whole scientific paper on this.
Right.
And believe me, there's some really elegant, hardcore math kind of hidden in those branches.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these abstract trees, they pop up everywhere, from computer algorithms to, believe it or not, real evolutionary relationships.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this paper, it dives into something called the Colijn Plazzotta ranking system.
Right.
CP rank for short.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
So imagine you're ranking trees based on how kind of balanced they are.
Okay.
The more symmetrical, the more even the branches, the lower the CP rank. But if the tree's all stretched out, like one long branch with a few leaves at the end,
Yeah.
that's going to get a high rank.
Oh, interesting. So a perfectly symmetrical tree is like the CP rank champion.
Yeah.
Low score wins, basically.
Exactly. And what this paper, what it reveals is that a tree's CP rank is very closely related to its height.
Okay.
And by height, we mean the longest path from the base of that tree all the way out to the farthest leaf.
It's like those height charts at the doctor's office, but for math. So wait, knowing a tree's height, that can give us clues about its CP rank and vice versa.
Precisely. The researchers were essentially looking for, and they found a kind of hidden code within these trees, a connection between two different ways of understanding their structure.
That's really cool. Now, this paper doesn't just look at one type of tree, right? They talk about different forests, which are really just different ways these trees could be like randomly generated.
Right.
Different ways those branches could sprout.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one they talk about is called uniformly random unlabeled binary trees.
Yep.
What does that even mean?
So imagine building a tree with like blocks, and each block is a branch.
Okay.
And every single combination of how you put those blocks together is equally likely. That's the idea here.
Okay.
A really diverse forest of all kinds of shapes.
So pure randomness, basically.
Exactly.
What about the second type of tree?
The second type is called uniformly random leaf-labeled binary trees.
Okay.
It's the same basic idea. But now imagine each leaf has like a unique tag or a label on it.
Huh.
Like they're numbered or something.
Okay, so a bit more like organized chaos.
Yeah, you could say that.
What about that third forest? It had a very science-y name, I remember.
Ah, yes, those are the Yule-Harding trees,
Yeah.
also known as random binary search trees.
Okay.
Picture this. You've got a tree growing, right?
Okay.
And each new branch that sprouts, it's equally likely to be longer or shorter than the one before it.
Okay.
Like imagine you're building a tree out of Legos,
I like that.
but you're always picking the next brick size randomly.
Okay, so some trees end up all bushy and others are more lanky.
Precisely. And this kind of tree growth, it's surprisingly common in computer science when you're thinking about how data is structured and searched.
Mm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Even though these three forests are generated so differently,
Right.
there's some fascinating similarities in how the CP rank behaves within each of them.
Wait, so even though the trees look really different, the way this ranking system plays out has common threads.
Yeah.
That's wild. Tell me more about those similarities.
Please.
So these different forests with their like totally different trees, they still show some like common ground when it comes to this CP rank thing.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of similarities are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest surprises was the influence of what's called the caterpillar tree.
Okay.
Remember how we said a high CP rank? That goes to those long, lopsided trees?
Yeah, the ones stretching out way more than they like branch out.
Exactly. Well, the caterpillar tree is like the king of lopsided. Mm-hmm. It's basically one long trunk with just a few leaves sticking out at the very end.
I'm picturing it.
And the research, this is the really cool part, the research shows that this caterpillar shape, it has a huge E impact on the average CP rank, like across entire groups of trees.
Whoa, so even if a forest has like a bunch of more balanced trees in it,
Right.
if a few of these caterpillar trees like sneak in there,
Yeah.
it throws the whole average off.
Exactly. It's like calculating the average wealth in a room, right? And then suddenly Bill Gates walks in and everyone else's net worth suddenly seems very average.
I like that analogy. So this caterpillar tree is like the Bill Gates of the tree world,
Yeah.
skewing the data just by existing.
Precisely. And this highlights something really important, right? Sometimes focusing only on the average, it can be misleading.
Yeah.
Those outliers, those unusual cases like our friend the caterpillar tree, they can actually reveal a lot about the underlying system.
It's like those what do they call black swan events, the ones you hear about in like finance.
Yeah.
Most of the time things are, humming along pretty predictable.
Right.
But then bam,
Yeah.
something totally unexpected happens and throws everything out of whack.
Exactly. And this is where the connection between CP rank and tree height, this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
The researchers found that under certain random tree models, the average height of a tree with a certain number of leaves grows at a very specific rate.
Okay, so back up a second. We're talking about how tall these theoretical trees get on average.
Right.
And somehow that's linked to this whole CP rank thing.
You got it. For instance, in those uniformly random models we talked about, remember?
Yeah.
Where every combination of branches is equally likely.
Right.
The average height, it grows roughly proportionally to the square root of the number of leaves.
So more leaves generally means a taller tree.
Uh-huh.
But not at a 1-to-1 rate. It's like those growth charts doctors use, but for math trees.
Precisely.
Okay.
Now, for the Yule-Harding trees, remember those? The Lego brick trees.
Yeah.
Their average height grows in proportion to the logarithm of the number of leaves.
Logarithm. Okay, that's ringing a bell from a like high school math class.
Sure.
But I might need a little refresher here. What's the key difference? Why does it matter if the height grows with the square root or the logarithm?
Well, it comes down to the overall shape and structure of the trees in the uniformly random models with that faster height growth, based on the square root.
Yeah.
You tend to get more balanced trees on average.
So those forests would probably have a lower average CP rank overall.
Exactly.
Since balanced trees get lower ranks, right?
Right. Now, the Yule-Harding trees with their slower logarithmic height growth, they tend to be more stretched out, less balanced.
Okay.
And what does that mean for their CP rank?
Higher ranks got to be, because those stretched out trees score higher on the CP, right?
It's like
Hold on, it's like comparing a sprawling oak tree to a tall, thin pine tree.
Exactly.
They grow differently, totally different shapes.
Yeah.
But how does all this theoretical tree talk, how does it apply to the real world? Give me an example. I need to see how this works in action.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the connection here.
Yeah.
We've gone from these like abstract trees to talking about growth rates and shapes and stuff.
Right.
But you're right, we need a real world example.
Right.
How does any of this actually like play out in something like, I don't know, computer science?
Okay, so let's say you're designing a database, right?
Okay.
The way you organize that data, its structure, it hugely impacts how quickly you can search for and retrieve information.
So it's like choosing the right filing system.
Exactly.
A messy one means you'll be like hunting forever to find the right document. Exactly. And that's where understanding tree structures and things like CP rank, that's where it becomes incredibly powerful.
Okay.
It can actually guide us to design more efficient algorithms for storing, searching, and managing all that data.
So these theoretical trees, they're like blueprints for our digital world.
That's a great way to put it. And it goes way beyond just computer science, too.
Oh, yeah?
Think about evolutionary biology for a second.
Okay.
Those diagrams you've seen showing how different species are related,
Yeah.
those are like trees, too.
Really?
They're called phylogenetic trees.
So we can use this CP rank stuff to trace the family history of different species.
You got it. And by comparing those evolutionary trees to the theoretical models we've been discussing, we can actually test different hypotheses about what drives biodiversity.
Wow.
It helps us understand if evolution favors certain shapes or patterns of relationships over time.
It's blowing my mind how this abstract math concept can have such huge implications.
I know, it's really something.
From tiny bits of data in a computer to the entire history of life on Earth.
It really speaks to the interconnectedness of knowledge, doesn't it?
It really does.
And there's still so much more to explore.
Like what?
Well, this paper, it focuses mainly on the average CP rank, right?
Right.
But what about those trees with truly unique ranks, the outliers that don't fit neatly into the averages?
Those are like the rare orchids in our forest.
Yes.
The ones that stand out from all the usual trees. They're probably worth investigating too, right?
Absolutely. Exploring those outliers, that could reveal even deeper insights into these tree structures.
Okay, so what kind of insights? Give me an example.
Well, for example, are there real-world systems where those unique CP ranks are more common? Or do they represent rare events with unexpected consequences, like our caterpillar example?
Oh, right.
These are the questions that keep mathematicians and computer scientists up at night.
That's a great point. So it's not just about the averages.
Right.
It's about looking at the full spectrum of possibilities.
Yes.
Those weird and wonderful outliers that might hold the key to some new discovery.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole area of research so exciting.
Yeah.
There's always something new to uncover, always a deeper layer to explore.
This has been an amazing journey.
It has.
We've climbed through branches of probability, explored forests of random trees, and even encountered the mighty caterpillar tree that reigns supreme in the world of CP rank.
He's a force of nature, that one.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, I would just say the next time you encounter a tree, don't just see its physical form.
Yeah.
Think about the hidden mathematical structures it represents.
Okay.
And the vast network of knowledge that those structures, that they connect, from the tiniest bits of data to the vastness of evolution.
Wow.
There's a whole world of hidden connections waiting to be discovered.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving deep into this fascinating world of, what are they called again?
Unlabeled binary rooted trees.
Right. And the Colijn Plazzotta ranking system, the CP rank.
It's a mouthful, I know.
It is, but fascinating stuff. Until next time, everyone, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
Trees, they seem pretty straightforward at first glance, but once you start digging a bit deeper, you realize there's a whole lot more complexity beneath the surface.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today we're doing exactly that. We're diving into the world of binary rooted trees.
Right.
Specifically, this really interesting ranking system called the Colijn Plazzotta rank, CP rank for short.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, could you maybe give us a quick rundown of what exactly a binary rooted tree is?
So, basically, imagine you got a tree trunk, right?
Okay.
That's your starting point, your root. Now, as you go up, each branch splits into exactly 2 smaller branches. And these structures, they're not just about, actual trees. They pop up in all sorts of fields. Like in computer science, they're used to visualize how algorithms work.
Huh.
And even in evolutionary biology, you'll find them in phylogenetic trees, which show how species diverge over time.
It's like a family tree for different species, kind of.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got these binary trees branching out in all their complexity, and then we have this CP rank that comes in and assigns a unique code to every single one of these structures.
Precisely. Think of it like a fingerprint for each tree.
Wow, that's really cool. So what's the point of ranking these trees in this way? What kind of insights does the CP rank actually give us?
Well, it helps us to kind of organize them, and it reveals patterns in their structure. For instance, you might have a tree that's long and spindly, mostly one main trunk with just a few branches at the very top. We call that a caterpillar tree. And then you've got shorter, bushier trees like the pseudocaterpillar, where the branches spread out more evenly. And these two, the caterpillar and the pseudocaterpillar, they're like our celebrity trees for this deep dive. They help us understand how a tree's shape influences its CP rank.
So just by looking at the CP rank, we can get a sense of whether a tree is more like a towering redwood or a sprawling oak, something like that.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And one of the most crucial factors in this ranking system is the tree's height. Turns out the height of a binary tree, the longest path from the root to a leaf, plays a major role in determining its CP rank.
Okay, so it's not just about how many branches a tree has then. It's more about how tall it is.
Exactly.
So what makes some trees rank higher in this system? Is it simply that taller trees automatically get a higher rank, or is there more to it than that?
Well, there's a bit more to it, actually. The reason height is so important has to do with the way the CP ranking system itself actually works. It's all about the order in which the system processes the branches.
Oh, okay. So how does the order in which branches are processed affect the rank of the entire tree? This is where it starts to get a little bit tricky for me, I think.
Yeah. Imagine the ranking system's like a librarian, right? And they're meticulously cataloging each tree based on its structure. This librarian starts by looking at the root of the tree, then the branches directly connected to it, and so on, moving upwards. The longer it takes to reach those topmost branches, meaning the taller the tree, the higher its CP rank tends to be.
So taller tree, longer it takes our metaphorical librarian to catalog it, higher the CP rank.
Exactly. And this is where the caterpillar tree we talked about with its single long trunk, it really stands out.
Yeah.
The research actually shows that among trees of the exact same height, the caterpillar consistently nabs the highest CP rank. It's like the CP ranking system's favorite, in a way.
Interesting. So being tall gives you an edge in the CP ranking system. But if you're a caterpillar tree, you're basically a top contender right out of the gate. So far, we've been talking about these idealized trees, right? But out in the real world, trees don't exactly grow according to some strict ranking system. So what happens when we introduce a bit of randomness into the mix?
That's where things get even more interesting, actually. We can use these mathematical models to generate random trees. Each model has its own set of rules that dictate how these virtual trees grow. It's kind of like creating a simulated forest where we can play around with different factors.
So we're basically simulating different tree growing scenarios, and then we can see how the CP rank is affected.
Exactly.
And what kind of rules are we talking about here for these models?
Right. So there are a bunch of different models, each with its own quirks. For example, you've got the uniform model. In this one, every single possible tree structure has an equal chance of being selected. Like, imagine pulling a random tree out of a hat, so to speak.
Okay.
But then you have other models, like the Yule-Harding model, which tries to simulate a more evolutionary process of tree growth.
Got it. So we've got these different ways of generating random trees. But the big question is, I guess, do these different models lead to different patterns in CP rank, even though the trees themselves are being generated randomly?
That's the key question. And what the research found is fascinating. Even when you introduce randomness, a tree's height, it still remains a major factor in its CP rank. And this holds true across all these different models.
Wow. So no matter how you grow your virtual forest, height still plays a starring role. But I'm curious, you mentioned that different models have different characteristics. So does the choice of model actually affect the average CP rank that we observe?
It does. And this is where those celebrity trees we were talking about earlier, they come back into play.
Okay.
Remember the caterpillar tree?
Yeah.
With its tendency for a higher CP rank.
Yeah.
Well, the research found that in the uniform model, the one where every tree structure has an equal chance, caterpillars are actually more common.
So in the uniform model, you're more likely to end up with a forest full of these tall, slender caterpillars compared to the other models.
Exactly. And because those caterpillars naturally tend to have higher CP ranks, their increased presence in the uniform model actually skews the average CP rank upwards.
Oh, I see. It's like those caterpillars are pulling the average up with them because they're so tall.
Precisely. It just goes to show that even in these systems where we're dealing with randomness, the underlying patterns and distributions, they can still have a huge impact on the overall picture.
That's fascinating. It really highlights how these seemingly simple models can reveal such intricate dynamics, right? Just because something is random doesn't mean it's completely unpredictable. There are still these underlying forces at play. So we've seen that the caterpillar tree with that distinctive shape, it consistently gets a high rank in the CP system.
Right.
It even has a noticeable impact on that average rank in the models where it pops up more often.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, is this like, I don't know, is this dominance? Is it just a quirk of the caterpillar itself?
Yep.
Or does it tell us something a bit deeper about the relationship between a tree's structure and its CP rank?
That's a really, really good question.
Yeah.
And it gets at the heart of what makes this research so interesting, you know.
Right.
The caterpillar's influence, especially on that average CP rank, it shows how some structural features can have a huge E effect.
Yeah.
Think of it like a statistical outlier.
Okay.
Even one super tall tree can really mess with the average height of an entire forest, right?
Right, yeah.
Makes it seem like all the trees are taller than they really are on average.
The caterpillar's kind of like that. It's revealing a kind of limitation of relying just on that average CP rank to understand the structure of, a whole population of trees.
Exactly.
Just because the average is high doesn't mean every tree is like tall and lanky like a caterpillar.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here then? If we want a more, complete understanding of tree structure, what else can we look at? What other avenues are there?
Well, that's what researchers are trying to figure out.
Right.
CP rank, it's useful, it gives us some clues, but it's not the whole picture.
Right.
Maybe we need to come up with totally new ranking systems.
Okay.
Ones that focus on different things like how symmetrical a tree is or how its branches are spread out. Or we could try, combining CP rank with other measurements to get a more well-rounded profile of a tree's overall shape.
Interesting.
It's a wide open field. There's a lot to explore.
It really makes you appreciate that even in something as, seemingly simple as a tree, there's all this hidden complexity just waiting to be uncovered.
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool about this kind of research.
Yeah.
What we've learned about CP rank and those outliers, like our caterpillar friend.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in these abstract systems,
right,
we often find reflections of stuff happening in the real world. And understanding those connections can lead us to all sorts of new insights and give us a deeper appreciation for the amazing patterns all around us.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, a huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this journey through the world of binary rooted trees and all their hidden depths.
Of course. Happy to be here.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some new ways to think about the elegance and complexity of the natural world.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring.